The Dirt with me, Mike Howell, an economics podcast where I present the down and dirty agronomic science to help grow crops and bottom lines. Inspired by economics.com, farming's go-to informational resource, I'm here to break down the latest crop nutrition research, news, and issues, helping farmers make better business decisions through actionable insights. Let's dig in. Well, hello again, everyone. Welcome back to The Dirt. Today we have Shaun Haney with us. He's going to be our guest today. Shaun, welcome to The Dirt.
Hey, Mike, it is great to be on the Dirt podcast. You do a fantastic job, have some great guests, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation, man.
Shaun, I'm looking forward to it as well. But before we get into it, introduce yourself to our listeners. I know a lot of people will recognize you and your voice but tell them a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of Real Agriculture, which I started kind of really as a hobby going back to 2008. I was a very unmechanically inclined farm kid that was working in our family seed operation, and we had a feed yard as well, and started doing some moonlighting and writing some blog posts at the time, and started taking a camcorder to farm shows to interview people in their booths. And it kind of snowballed and took off from there, and realized that probably had a lot more talent for broadcasting than I ever did farming. Things just started rolling. I feel so blessed to be able to do what I get to do on a daily basis. We now do a daily radio show on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. I appear regularly on places like RFD TV and AgriTalk in the U.S. And our media company has really grown. We started out just talking about Canadian issues and targeted towards Canadian farmers and ranchers, but really I think we've really become much more of a kind of a true North American media company with some of our work on Sirius XM. So I feel very blessed.
Well, Shaun, I know your travel schedule is pretty hectic. We were talking before we started recording. You've been on the road for over a week now. Tell us a little bit about where all you travel, where you've been over the winter.
Oh man, I go like coast to coast and north south. I think I probably have more border crossings between Canada and the U.S. than anybody else in ag media. I used to always just do a lot of like conference coverage where I'd go to Commodity Classic or go to Cattle Con and cover those events. But in the last couple of years, the speaking side of the business has really, really grown. And I've been intentional about that. So I have been really across rural Canada and rural America the past 2 years quite a bit. I'm probably doing like 35, 40 speaking events in the year, which is a lot of time in hotels and on airplanes. When you've got premium status with 3 airlines and 2 hotels all at the same time, you're traveling probably a little bit too much. I have been to, everywhere from like Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, Arizona. I've got a couple of events coming up in Iowa. And then you look at Canada, I was in the Maritimes in like New Brunswick, all the way to speaking in a place like Abbotsford, British Columbia, and everywhere in between. So it's not all like big city stuff. A lot of it's landing in the airport and trying to figure out how far you got to drive to the event. And is there a hotel? That's always a question as well. But it honestly, no matter if you're in the US or in Canada, the issues are really the same. Now, where they fit on the priority scale may be a little bit different. There could be a different angle and take to it. But for the most part, it's a lot of the same sort of stuff. And I think because I get to talk to so many different audiences in agriculture from so many different geographies, it really allows you to provide better, aggregated perspective. Like, hey, this is happening in Alberta. That's also an issue in Colorado. And this is how the people in Colorado actually solve this problem. Like, it actually helps you get to solutions faster for the audience. And so I just love it. It's a great job.
Well, Shaun, that's kind of where we wanted to go today. We're just getting ready to start planting down here in the South for our 2026 crop. And every year, each year is going to be a little different. We know we're going to have challenges that we've got to overcome every year. You visit with a lot of growers and a lot of people that work in the industry. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges that these growers are facing this year. What's top of mind?
Well, it's tough. And you mentioned the South. And when I try to tell audiences and show them through some of the numbers from USDA and American Farm Bureau, the southern U.S. is really in the worst spot from a profitability perspective. You look at USDA's forecast on, say, the average cotton acre, like $380 an acre loss. That wins. That's not a competition you want to win when it comes to this game. You know, rice, peanuts, cotton, sugar, sorghum. Those are all southern crops, and they are really they're in a bad shape profitability wise. No matter where you are, though, across North America, you hear the same thing: concern about the abundance of crop supplies, the need for more demand for those crops domestically or internationally through trade. Prices have rolled over, and input prices have remained, what we'll call sticky. In a lot of my presentations, there's a lot of focus on something like fertilizer prices, for example, but that doesn't tell the whole story, Mike. In American Farm Bureau put out a great chart where they showed fertilizer prices as a percentage of overall cost. And as an overall percentage of cost, fertilizer actually is declining, meaning it's the entire cost complex that is rising, right? And so it's not just variable costs. Because I think a lot of times the farmer focuses on those variable costs, and that's only about a third of the cost complex. It's the other 2/3, the fixed costs that are also been rising. That's, it's machinery, it's labor, it's things like that have really put the farmer in a negative margin position and put a lot of pressure on them to try to find some more revenue, so to speak. And I think that is the case from coast to coast. You could be in Oregon or you could be in New York State or where you are in Mississippi. And I guarantee if you went to local farm meeting, they're talking about exactly that.
I hear it everywhere I go. And that these variable costs, we can do some things to manage those. The fixed cost is where it gets a little more challenging. And do we want to sell this tractor? I mean, we can sell a tractor and get rid of that cost. Do we want to sell this piece of ground? That gets really challenging, and folks don't want to do that. We're having to look at some of these tough challenges. What are you seeing? How are folks overcoming that challenge?
Well, I think a big part of it is really you got to know your numbers, right? And everybody's in a different point in that pendulum, just like they are with agronomics. You're an expert in agronomics. I am not, but I am trying to improve. And that's the important point here is what am I doing to incrementally improve my knowledge on the subject? That works for agronomy. It also works for farm financial knowledge. And a lot of us got into the world of agriculture, whether it's raising livestock or growing crops. It wasn't to dig into the numbers. I love the numbers of farming. Like, what farmer said that? They got into the business because they like raising livestock or growing crops, and that's where their expertise is. But as the entrepreneur, we can't ignore the numbers. We gotta know them, and it's a part of being that farmer CEO, if you want to put it that way. So I think that's really one of the most critical things is having a handle on that. And when it comes to the decision making, I'm a huge proponent of. One of the things we need to talk a lot more about in the world of agriculture when it comes to being the farm manager is return on investment. When we're trying to come up with, does it work to buy that combine, or does it work to buy, what seed hybrid should I go with and all that kind of stuff? It's the upfront cost is really one of the criteria, right? Where it's like, oh, that cost sounds about right, or it doesn't sound about right. Just really put it in most simplistic terms. But that only tells a portion of the story. It's really about the return on investment that we need to move more of the discussion towards. And so what I talk about in my presentations is, if that's a $20 per acre cost, some may say, oh man, I can't afford $20 an acre, or I can. But maybe what we need to do is move more to, well, what does that actually return me? If it's $10 back, well, get rid of it. I don't care how much you like your sales rep. You shouldn't be using that product. But if it gets you back 50, that's a yes. In order to get to that, we need to have more access to the data and be able to synthesize that data and turn that data into information so we're able to make those kind of decisions. And I think that's a big challenge for a lot of growers to get to that point where they actually know the ROI. It's much easier in a livestock operation, like in a dairy or maybe a poultry barn, because it's a contained variable environment. Being outside with crops, there's a lot more variables, so that's a little bit more difficult, but we got to do the best we can to get there.
Shaun, I'm kind of looking at an accounting class this year and trying to brush up a little bit on that and understand some of these costs and where they come from. And that's something we're talking about. Where do these costs come from? And you hit on a lot of these things we're talking about in that class. And it's kind of hard to determine where these costs are actually coming from a lot of times, the fixed cost and the variable cost and how you assign those costs. something like these tractors, do we just associate that as a fixed cost across the whole system, or do we break it down? Okay, in each field, it's going to cost us this much to run that tractor in each field. And when we start breaking it down and looking at it like that, we can really get a handle on how much that piece of equipment is going to cost us.
Yeah, and one of the things that comes up a lot is I'll hear a farmer say, you know what, I got to get rid of some of this expensive ground, right? Oh man, it's just Mike, it's too expensive. I'm paying too much rent on this piece. But maybe that most expensive ground is the most productive ground you have. Maybe we should.
You got to look at the profits.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe you should be getting rid of that cheapest ground that produces the least. Assuming that all correlates in that way. That's the ground you should be getting rid of, because the return is probably higher with that more expensive, higher, more productive land than it is with the cheap, unproductive land. And that may not be true in all situations, but it's about knowing that information to get you to the higher probability of making a good financial decision. I was in Lincoln, Nebraska back in the fall. I was doing a presentation on break-even analysis from an entrepreneur standpoint. I'm not an accountant. I'm an entrepreneur. A grower said to me, one of the things that they did was we've convinced ourselves agronomically, get the crop in as early as possible, an early start. This farmer said to me that when I looked at it, I was having another hired person on the farm for the whole season for, in reality, that 1 week. That doesn't make sense. That return doesn't, am I actually getting that crop in that week early, or did it rain and then we were pushed back anyways? Like it's thinking about it from that standpoint. The efficiency, I think what some of the farmers on the higher end of this farm financial literacy curve, the things that they're looking at is the real efficiency and productivity of their farm equipment. How much do I really need? The matching of that to the acres, and doing the same from a labor perspective. In some of the states, you got overtime rules, right? And so does it make sense to have more staff around you, minimize the overtime hours versus maybe what you were doing previously? And the same goes for equipment. The matching of, we've got 2 combines in our geography. What's the most efficient amount of acres for that amount of equipment? And it is really kind of trying to pair those and match those and mapping them. And I think some of where it really helps farmers out here is when they're not doing this alone. The benefit of things like peer groups, the benefit of things like the ability to benchmark to other farms of your shape and size. They may not be in the exact same geography, but they're up against some of the same scalable challenges as you. That will really assist you in getting to probably a lot more of an efficient, structured farm.
Well, Shaun, we've talked a lot about the economy, and that's top of everybody's mind. What other challenges are you hearing growers talk about coming up into this growing season?
Yeah, well, that one is, I think one of the big ones. I honestly, I think it's outside of the economy. I think a lot of farms are really struggling with, what I hear from people is something like access to labor is a real major one, and that kind of is an economic one, but it's more on the HR side, outside of the accounting department on a farm, and not just like a body that can breathe, but somebody that has the skills or the aptitude to get to the proper skill level through a little bit of training.
Shaun, it wasn't too many years ago, a body that could breathe could do an awful lot on the farm. But these days, everything is automated. You've got computers in every tractor. You've got to have a little bit of intelligence to get things to even flow through the planter. So not just anybody can do this job anymore.
Isn't that kind of funny? Like, because we always talked about how, once we had all this technology, anybody could run the equipment. Well, I hear from farmers all the time, I was with some farmers last week in Calgary, Alberta, and they said, Dad can't run the combine anymore. He's a couple generations of machines now away from where his prime was in terms of being an operator. Can't stick him in there anymore. And he's so intimidated, he can't do it. Now, but there will be a point, and who knows how long this is, where, we won't need the operator. I was at a feed yard in Nebraska back in the fall where, man, they are super close to like something like a robotic feed truck. Like they are like one step away. Like all the technology is there. They're almost to the point where they wouldn't even need a driver. If they can just, that technology can make one more little bit of a leap. So like that kind of automation and autonomy is coming. But again, it not for all operations. It might, the first place is not going to be a corn and bean farm in Iowa or Indiana. More likely to be in horticulture or more of a confined livestock environment, in my opinion.
Shaun, we've talked a lot about challenges, and we know we're going to have those, but with every challenge, we're going to have some opportunities. What's the optimistic outlook? What are you seeing as far as opportunities for these growers in 2026?
Well, you put it in 2000. You put it in that context of 26. This is live to fight another day for the cropping sector, for sure. In all honesty, that's the way that I see it. Like, can things turn around on a dime and all of a sudden the market takes off like it did post pandemic? I'm not going to rule that out, but this very much feels like a live to fight another day. When it comes to the beef sector, though, we're talking like that. We hear Secretary Rollins say all the time, the golden age of agriculture is coming. Well, the beef sector is going through a golden age, especially for the cow-calf sector. It is absolutely amazing what we have seen from a beef profitability standpoint here in the last 24 months at the ranch level, and much deserved because there's been a long period of really making no money and wondering why the heck we have these cows on the farm. I think longer term, though, for the cropping sector, there is a lot of opportunity. People are going to say, like, hey, if you're not optimistic, you couldn't be a farmer. And there's that great Will Rogers quote that I can't totally remember in terms of optimism. But I think there is opportunity. Agriculture really is it is the cornerstone of rural economic development. We have the energy sector in a lot of rural areas, but agriculture is probably a little bit more of a stable horse when it comes to rural economic development. And I think we're making some serious inroads when it comes to domestic consumption of crops through things like biofuels. Whether that's in Canada or in the US, we're figuring that out, that there's a little bit more friction to trade as of late. And so we need to have some domestic solutions for some of the crops that we're growing. And at the same time, though, I think there is opportunity on the trade front as well, as we see the middle class grow. USDA has talked a lot about the longer term opportunity in Africa, but there's also, of course, trying to make inroads in places like China, and you can't ignore India as well. And if you're an old timer, and we like to reminisce in this industry, we've been through bad, poor cycles profitability wise before, and we've come out of them. And the adversity is probably going to help us build up some calluses a little bit when it comes to some of the farm management and making sure our farm is structured with some resilience. So honestly, Mike, I think there's lots of reasons to be optimistic and think that there's a strong future in front of us. It's just in the short term, it's tight, and we're going to have to really, really show some grit to get through it.
I couldn't agree more. Shaun, you go to a lot of trade shows. You see a lot of exciting things that's not quite here yet. Talk a little bit about what you see coming in the future. I mean, we're talking about, you mentioned robots and the autonomous vehicles coming out. How far down the road do you think that kind of stuff is?
I think, if you're like in Oregon in a horticulture, like a blueberry, or maybe it's an apple orchard, I just think we're really close. Obviously there's a lot of optimistic about drone spraying and some of the size of these drones and the speed of these drones. Farmers there's an example of a technology that farmers are just really chomping at the bit. Now, our regulations around what products we can use are probably a little bit behind where the drones are, where farmers want it all to be. I think that's one that people are very excited about. Obviously, you think back to 4 or 5 years ago at Farm Progress Show and Commodity Classic, there was a lot of large broadacre solutions or prototype showcased when it came to autonomous tractors. That seems to have slowed down a little bit. I was at multiple Agritechnicas in Germany in a row, And, there was a bit of a battle between, are we going to have autonomous 500 horsepower tractors, or are we going to have these swarming, more of a swarm situation where there's multiple units? I always thought the swarming made the most sense, and also retrofitting the tractors we already can drive. Retrofitting those makes more sense than buying a 600 horsepower tractor with no cab on it. I always thought that was kind of, that didn't make any sense to me. But I'm sure you've talked about weed resistance and dealing with weeds, and we're going to need all the tools. And some of the things that are happening with See and Spray, I think is, that technology is here and only going to get better. And when I think about having to tackle some of these crazy weeds like Palmer amaranth and water hemp, and kochia is a terrible one in the northern plains and into Western Canada. We need as many of these tools as possible. Whether it's weed picking robots, it's drone spraying, it's sensor technology to only spray certain weeds with higher concentrate targeted products. We need all of that. And I think, a lot of times, Mike, we focus on like autonomy, like the operator, but I think when it comes to the technology, I think we should be the most excited about all the different ways we're potentially going to be able to remove weeds from the field, because that's the battle that we're losing. We love driving the planter, we love driving the combine. Well, we not saying we don't like driving the sprayer, but we're spending more and more time in it, and the weeds are winning. And so we need some help.
We're definitely getting more resistant weeds, and we're not getting a whole lot of new chemistry coming out. We've got to come up with other ways to control these weeds, and I'm excited about what's coming in the terms of weed control. A lot of new exciting technology coming there. Shaun, we started off talking about real agriculture and how you got that started. Remind our listeners again about some of the programs you have going and where they can find out more information about real agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. For a lot of the dirt audience, a great place to check us out is the Real Ag Radio show. Real Ag Radio is every weekday on Rural Radio 147 on Sirius XM. You can also download the podcast. Another show that might be of real interest to your listeners, Mike, is on Monday nights. We do an agronomist show, and the agronomist is a live YouTube based show where we focus in on an agronomic issue, and we have different researchers or agronomists from different parts of North America. And it's not like a slideshow. It's not like, you present for 15 minutes. It's a conversation, and with some real key experts. And there's a great live chat and people participating every week. And you can also get CCA, CU credits as well for that. And we also have a number of different crop schools across corn, soybeans, wheat, canola, and pulse crops that people may be interested in as well at realagriculture.com. So we're doing lots of agronomic stuff, which is, hey, that's why they got into the business.
Well, Shaun, we really appreciate you being with us today. Do you have any closing comments, anything you want to leave our listeners with before we wrap it up?
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the adversity and some of the margin pressure like we talked about. But I always try to take people back, Mike, to during the pandemic. I remember doing an interview with Jim Mintert from Purdue University. And at that time, it was right during the pandemic, and, things were hitting the fan. And it was like, it seemed bad. Packing plants were shutting down, and, could we get chemistries and all this kind of stuff? Huge profitability concern. And I remember Dr. Mintert saying, Shaun, whoa, slow down. There's opportunity here. Farmers with, strong balance sheets, farmers with good working capital. This is where, and I remember he used this exact phrase, this is when they pounce. This is where there's opportunity because they have a plan and they've prepared their farm business for these kinds of struggles. And if you get lost in the chaos and you're in the noise and the fog of it all, you're going to have a hard time steering through it. It's the people that can get above it and kind of see the horizon and see how they have to navigate through some of these challenging times. Those are the farmers that will really come out the other side a lot stronger. So there is a message of positivity here as well.
Well, Shaun, we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to visit with us today. Listeners, we appreciate you tuning in. And if you will, hang around for just a couple of moments. We'll be right back with segment 2. Farming isn't farming without questions. And now there's a place to go for answers. At Economics, an entire team of agronomists is waiting and ready to help for free. No question is too big or too small. Visit nutrien-economics.com and submit your question with the Ask an Agronomist feature. Listeners, welcome back to segment 2. We're glad you're back with us for this section where we ask an agronomist our question of the week. Today, we've got Dr. Carl Wyant in the studio. Carl, glad to have you today.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on.
Carl, today's question has to do with starter fertilizers. We need to know when starter fertilizers are most effective, and are they more effective in certain crops?
Yeah, fantastic question as we gear up here into planting season. In my experience, starter fertilizers don't really impart an impact on specific crops that you might be putting in the ground, say soybeans versus corn or something like that. Really what I found across my career is that starter fertilizers work really well when you think of the when you need it and the where you're using it. So if you're trying to grow a crop or establish a crop during a time of year where soils tend to be cool and moist, those same conditions that limit phosphorus availability and movement in the soil, that's a great time to add a starter fertilizer. Give it that little boost that the crop needs and get around those soil conditions that might otherwise get in the way of your phosphorus program. Another thing to think about is the where you're planting. If you're planting into soils that are low phosphorus just to begin with, just background rates of phosphate, that's a fantastic place to add starter fertilizer. Add the needed nutrients as indicated by the soil report and give your crop that head start that you're looking for.
Great advice, Carl. We really appreciate you joining us today. Listeners, thank you for tuning in this week. And as always, if you need more information about anything we've discussed today, you can visit our website. That's nutrient-economics.com. Until next time, this has been Mike Howell with The Dirt.